Netflix is on the VPN warpath, but can it win?
And what should we expect from Apple's iPhone 7? Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm here with a man who's still blocked in China, Syria, Crimea, and North Korea, Alex Kidman. We're also joined by special guest Tim Biggs, technology writer for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Alex, what's new in tech?
Apple's all but killed off its free radio service via Apple Music, with the radio station feature set to scuttle behind its paywall at the end of January, save for the Beats One station, which will remain free. It's in stark contrast to competitors Spotify and especially Pandora, both of whom offer free radio-style listening features. If you are an Apple Music subscriber, the upside is that the radio stations behind the paywall will be dropping all advertising when they make the switch.
The rush is on to access the metadata of everyday Australians, with 61 non-law enforcement federal and state agencies requesting access to phone records and other data without a warrant. Everyone from Australia Post to the National Measurement Institute, Greyhound Racing Victoria even, have applied for metadata access, despite initial assurances from Federal Attorney General George Brandis that the legislation would reduce the scope of access.
Iconic Australian technology retailer Dick Smith has gone into voluntary administration, citing cash flow issues, leaving customers with deposits and gift cards at the end of a very long queue of creditors. Woolworths and Coles have said that they'll exchange any Dick Smith gift cards they sold late last year for equivalent store vouchers, while several online retailers are offering limited store credit if you're still holding a card.
Netflix has started its threatened crackdown on foreigners sneaking into the US library, with Australian geo-dodging service Uflix reporting that a small number of its customers have received warnings to disable their unblocking features. As with previous crackdowns, geo-dodging services have vowed to deploy technical countermeasures to stay one step ahead of Netflix blocking efforts.
So Adam and Tim, it seems like everyone and their dog, and possibly also their dog, wants access to my metadata. What the hell's going on?
Yeah, I'm particularly concerned about the National Measurement Institute. I mean, that's kind of personal, isn't it? What exactly do they want to know?
Look, I think your measurements are all too well known. But, I mean, some of these are just weird, measurement institutes and greyhound racing. But the biggest scope of it is, well, I think, really very, very creepy and very much in line with a lot of the stuff that Brandis said wasn't going to happen with this legislation. Am I going into tinfoil hat territory there?
I think the scary thing is that these are people who had access to the metadata previously. It's just that now they have to ask for permission before they can get it.
Yeah, you're right. It kind of is scary what we didn't know was going on. I thought it was interesting that a lot of them are actually racing associations, the greyhound harness racing for most of the states. So I think there's a lot probably going on there with trying to crack down on fraud and other crimes that was going on there.
Yeah, but look, I mean, this is how it's being painted. It's being painted as this, it's being used to assist in criminal inquiries. But an awful lot of these bodies do not actually have criminal prosecution powers. Actually giving them data is a massive invasion of privacy. Obviously, it's a massive invasion of privacy that has been going on unbeknownst to people, and now we do know about it. But it's still in no way a good thing. It's in every possible way a big problem.
So you don't buy the whole "if you've got nothing to hide" argument?
No, in fact, this absolutely puts the kibosh on that, because I think your own privacy in where people want to go and where people want to be is, it's a fairly basic kind of right. But the idea that, Greyhound Racing Victoria might decide that they want to know where my phone's been, well, I've never dealt with them, but I'll have previously I had no way of knowing if that was what they were doing, and now they could, in theory, have requested my metadata to know where I am because someone in Greyhound Racing Victoria has got a grudge against me because of something that I said about Microsoft phones 2 years ago. I mean, I'm spitballing there in terms of positions, but I think you can see where that leads. You give people information like this and it's abused all too easily.
So, Tim, what are you trying to hide from Greyhound Victoria?
Well, I mean, I suppose the real positive that comes out of this, and the only positive, is that people might actually ask themselves, well, what is Australia Post really care? Why do Bankstown City Council really need to know who I've been emailing. Like, what are they going to do with it?
So it does help raise awareness, and it is easier, as you say, for the Greens and others who've been fighting against this, say, look, this is exactly what we were talking about.
Yeah, and I think it'll be hard for branders to allow it now that, that we've seen the full scope of it.
Yeah, I'd also be willing to say, though, this raises the other big issue with metadata, which is the privacy and protection of that metadata. This is guesswork, but I'm going to say that some of these bodies may well not have entirely secure systems in the way that, for example, the Defence Department probably has a very secure system. Australia Post, Greyhound Racing, probably a little less so. What happens when and if there's a leak? I mean,
what could ever go wrong with Australia Post?
They're 100% reliable with every piece of information handed to them, as we know.
So the Apple rumour mill is turning once again. We're talking about iPhone 7 rumours here. Some of these kind of bother me. Alex, what have you heard and what do you think of it?
Look, there's just so many rumours doing the rounds, which is very typical for kind of this stage of the iPhone development
There's a lot of
cycle.
misinformation, yeah.
There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of stuff based on prototypes. There's a lot of stuff based on guesswork. And wouldn't it be lovely if it had thinking? And then there's some stuff that could well happen. I mean, the big lead one that everyone seems to think is very, very likely is that Apple will drop the headphone jack, that they'll go with a Bluetooth only, or presumably Bluetooth only solution, and not have a little hole in the base of their phones anymore. Does that worry anyone?
That makes me kind of stabby. Really does make me kind of stabby. I mean, people going, but Apple got rid of the floppy drive and Apple got rid of the optical stuff and whatever. Yeah, but the difference here is they're getting rid of something and forcing a more expensive proprietary alternative on us. It's not like they've gotten rid of us because the headphone jack has, outlived its usefulness. They're going to force us into either using a Lightning connection or Bluetooth, both of which makes it a lot more expensive to buy headphones, and Bluetooth kills your battery. So I don't really see this as a big step forward. Tim, you're an iPhone man or an Android man or, heaven forbid, a Windows Phone man. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm an Android man at the moment. And while I agree Bluetooth is not a good option, I don't know if I really have a problem with Lightning for audio. I mean, the 3.5mm jack it's 100 years old at this point. I'm pretty sure there are doors that'll open in terms of interface between a phone and a headset once you get rid of that particular, piece of technology. I feel like worst case scenario is you're going to have a dongle hanging out of your phone to plug your old headset into.
I guess the big thing with that will be whether or not they include the dongle in the box, or whether or not they charge you $20 for it on top. That would be a little insulting. The one way, actually, that I could see this being a plus, and this ties into one of the other rumours that's doing the rounds, is if they're getting rid of the headphone jack so that they could actually follow, in fact, the lead that Sony and for a brief, limited span of time Samsung had with making the iPhone properly waterproof. That would make sense to me.
Yeah, I can see how that would definitely have an appeal, because then Samsung could stop teasing them all the time in those ads. But
Samsung dropped waterproofing for the S6. They only did it for the single year. Sony is actually the stayer in this field. Its Xperia Z series has had waterproofing for the past 2 to 3 years quite consistently.
And they've also had 3.5mm jacks.
This is true, actually.
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
true.
They didn't have to chuck it away. Another big thing will be sound quality, actually, because somewhere between the phone file on the phone and your ears, you need a DAC. You need a digital to analog converter. Now, there's one built into the phone that converts it to analog for the headphone jack. When the music comes out the Lightning connector, it's still digital. So if you are going to have an adapter to plug your headphones into, then that little adapter is going to have a DAC in it. And the quality of the DAC makes a big difference to the quality of the end sound. So Apple will probably sell an expensive one. If others sell cheap and nasty, $20 ones, you will really hear the difference in terms of the sound quality. Your average punter probably doesn't know much about this kind of thing, so they might not realise what they're getting themselves into.
Just to play devil's advocate there, I think the average punter probably wouldn't know the difference. The average punter tends to be happy with quite low bitrate quality music as it is. And I suspect the cheap and nasty option, whether it's the cheap and nasty option that they bundle or indeed it could open up, of course, third-party DACs as well, if they want to license Lightning. It could open up that kind of market for the more audiophile end. I think the mass market at that end is not really going to pick the difference unless they're explicitly told, at which point you get into that whole how much difference can you tell audiophile nonsense argument to a certain extent.
I think as usual, the mass market is probably going to be all hot and bothered in the months leading up, picking all these things apart. But in the end, if they're going to get an iPhone, they're going to get the iPhone, and they'll deal with whatever it has.
Yeah.
What about the persistent rumor that Apple will be the first to market with Li-Fi connectivity on the iPhone? What do we think of that?
I can see how it would maybe fit into their smart home sort of stuff, except they're very focused on HomeKit and Bluetooth low power, I think. So it would kind of be one very out of the box. I'm not sure. Apple doesn't tend to jump into technologies when they're that immature. They kind of wait for someone else to get the ball rolling and then they step in and polish it.
They have some history in saying, right, well, here's a new thing for a phone. First 64-bit CPU, for example, they jumped into that well ahead of the Android pack. So it's not unprecedented, but I think I agree with you. I think it's just way too immature a technology. I think this is fairly much pie-in-the-sky thinking.
Yeah, I reckon Li-Fi is one of the ones maybe they've been testing it out, or they've been tooling around with it. It seems way too early, and I'm not even sure how they would implement it in a fairly current phone. So yeah, probably not.
What about wireless charging?
Apple doesn't seem very keen on wireless charging. I mean, there have been numerous Qi-compatible cases and adapters and things that you can get for existing iPhone models, but Apple doesn't seem to want to play in that space. It introduces some problems. I mean, there's the obvious problem with wireless charging is, of course, there is some level of power loss in doing it, so it's not terribly quick, and given general iPhone battery woes, do they want to be promoting something that's going to charge your iPhone slower, even if it's a little bit more convenient? I don't see it. I don't see it happening. It's not impossible. The technology is pretty mature and they could probably throw it in there quite cheaply, but I've got my doubts.
What do you reckon, Tim? Wireless charging?
I don't think so on the iPhone 7. Maybe in a year or so they can release their own case with a hunchback on the back of it with a wireless charging plate on there, and we can all pay an extra $120 or whatever it is for that.
So that'd be a hunch on top of the hunch that's already the battery pack.
Exactly, we'll just stack them, yeah.
It's basically going to be a staircase on the back of your iPhone.
I'm tempted to say, like with you guys, that the ship is kind of sailed on that, but I would also say that wireless charging is about at that point in a technology's life cycle where Apple does tend to step in and say, well, everyone else has done this and we don't think they've done it right, so we're going to give it a fancy name and everyone's going to love it and think we invented it. Apple has a long history of doing that, and I think wireless charging is perhaps in the right zone for that.
Look, as I said, the technology is totally mature, and yeah, if they did do it, it totally would be Apple magical charging.
It fits, it fits their way of doing things.
Yeah, I've got my doubts about that. I've got my serious doubts about that one. What about the wackier rumours, flexible displays or pop-out joysticks? Is this just the rumour mill, having a bit of mutual masturbation, or should we put any credence with those at all?
I think usually when you look back, you see that there was a skerrick of something a couple of years ago that surfaced and disappeared, and then Apple had actually been working on it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see maybe the Touch ID built into the display to get rid of the bezels, or what else? I don't think a pop-out joystick. I think that ship's past. I don't think they'll be doing that.
And put a keyboard on it too.
Then you get sued by BlackBerry. It might be a way they could make some money.
Cold, very cold. Alex, Netflix says they're cracking down on VPNs. I think we've heard this story before. Are they going to have any more luck this time than they have in the past?
Well, they're in a very different position to where they were in the past. Previously, it just used to be everyone flooding into the US, mostly. Occasionally the UK, because they got a few exclusive
they got
programs.
Some good stuff.
But it was everyone all around the planet doing that because they couldn't get Netflix. And then their big bombshell at CES this year was, hey, we're everywhere. Asterisk, except China, Crimea, North Korea, and Syria. But they're everywhere else. And I mean, when I say they're everywhere else, they are in tiny little islands that you've probably never heard of, and that I have serious doubts about the broadband quality of. And I've looked at the broadband speeds around the world for all the places that they're at. And the vast majority of them can get, standard def Netflix as an average, maybe. But Whether or not they're serious about those markets remains to be seen. I'm sure they've just cut a bunch of geolocating deals. But having done that, of course, the studios that they cut all the deals for all their content with will have put an immense amount more pressure on them to not just kind of turn a bit of a blind eye to VPN and DNS redirect kind of usage. So they came out with this statement which said, look, because of the contracts we've got, because of the historical model, we're going to start cracking down on this. We intend, and they've said this before too, we intend to put all of our content going forward on a global basis. We intend to license on a global basis. But that's probably going to be a much smaller library of content, because if you're a content holder, what you actually want to do is maximize the profit out of your piece of content. That doesn't automatically follow that you just license it to Netflix for whatever pittance they're willing to pay you. So they've said they're going to do it, and they seem to be doing it. There's all sorts of reports, especially at the DNS redirect stage. Those are the simpler, cheaper services that mask your IP address. At that level, there seem to be instances where they do appear to be blocking and calling out that they're blocking, not just, oh, the service isn't working right now, well, maybe reboot your router or update your IP address with your DNS people. No, you're getting messages that say, hey, it looks like you're using some kind of proxy redirect. Please stop doing that and then try again.
I think the phrase "a blind eye" pretty much sums up Netflix's approach to this till now. It's just been very much making noise but not doing much. Tim, what's been your experience over the years as how hard it is to get into Netflix as opposed to other US services?
Well, I think you'd have to put Netflix right at the low end of the scale in terms of difficulty. It's comically easy. I don't think of it. You don't hear of anyone who has troubles with their credit cards, really. All the platforms they're on, you can easily get the Netflix app. It's just not very difficult. But I think Netflix really, it's not in their interest to make it difficult. But as you say, Alex, they really have to, they have to go out there and be seen to be, going along with the lines set by the production companies.
Well, I did a quick check around my house today, and the two VPN services and the DNS workaround that I use at the moment all still seem to be working fine. And they're all services that have said in the past, whenever these things have happened, they'll find a way around it. I've noticed with VPNs, what they'll do sometimes, if you're with a VPN service, we'll say that has 20 points across the US that you can get into, New York and LA might get blocked, but what they'll do is they'll quietly tweak the Albuquerque server, and if you know where to go, you can still bluff your way in. So they will find workarounds for this kind of stuff.
It will totally be a cat and mouse game from here on out, and it kind of becomes that question of how much value is there in the cat and mouse game. It's interesting to look at the numbers. A piece that I co-authored at my day writing gig at finder.com.au looked at the exact numbers of titles that the US has that you won't find on any Australian streaming service. That's not just Netflix Australia, but Stan and Presto as well. And then the reverse of that, the titles that are on Australian streaming services that aren't on Netflix US at all. The numbers are, if you tally all three services against the one, are almost identical, but of course they're different pieces of content. And this comes down to that old thing that the value in these services is, of course, if they've got content you want to see.
So who's the big winner here, do you think, Tim, out of all this?
Well, I think consumers are still much winners. I don't think Netflix is doing anything that will have a market effect on our ability to access overseas services. I mean, Netflix's known strategy is blacklisting exit points from VPN services. They've done it before, they'll get around it again. And I'll continue to just use my phone to switch between the different locations and watch all day.
Yes, I think it's your Foxtels, your Prestos, and your Stans of the world, and your QuickFlixes who've been really pushing this for a long time, because they're the ones who really feel the pain from this kind of stuff. And it will be interesting if Netflix can actually manage to keep Australians out of foreign libraries, then I think it really will be a shot in the arm for, well, particularly Presto and Stan, because people who've just stuck with Netflix without even really looking at the others, because everybody knows Netflix is better, if they're suddenly stuck with the Australian library, will be more tempted to go, you know what, I might take a look at Stan or Presto and see what they've got to offer. And you're actually comparing apples with apples now, so they could be the big winners there. Even if this block doesn't actually have much of an effect, it still might cause a few people to think about having a look at those other services that they might have written off in the past.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more interesting things actually that came up in terms of researching the numbers and looking at the full libraries by scraping all of them is it's very obvious to see why they don't reveal their full libraries if they can get away with it. I mean, it's not entirely possible for them to stop people looking this stuff up if you know what to do. But if when you scroll down through a list of all of the titles on a given service, it's fascinating to see the stuff that you go, God, I'd just never watch that, I'd never watch that, I'd never watch that. But of course, that's going to be different for every single person out there. So, yeah, the winners in all of this, I would say consumers are still in a good position. Probably the content providers. I mean, I think ultimately this is going to start pushing, and we're just going to start seeing more of this. Probably not just with Netflix, though. I'm hopeful that we'll see some of the other US services go global because Netflix has. That we'll see Hulu's, that we'll see Amazon Prime, that kind of content as well. Simply because it'll provide that competition point to keep prices low. My biggest worry is that Netflix will end up getting all these rights back, being the single global number one, and then going, oh yeah, prices, they're going up. Because in fact,
jerks about it, yeah.
Well, in fact, they've just, if you're a long-term Netflix US subscriber, they've just done this. A couple of years back, they put their prices up and said, oh, if you're on the older plans, you can stay on those. Well, they've just said, actually, no, you can't stay on those. Welcome to a couple of bucks price hike.
Well, when are those plans going up?
The plans themselves went up. US plans went up a couple of years ago.
But when's the actual price change going to? I know that they changed it a couple of years ago and said that you've got a few years, breathing space. So when's it actually going to tick over? Now, you're saying? I better crunch my numbers.
Yeah, I need to check my bank account.
Yeah, me too, because I've been paying for the US service for a long time, and I'm still paying for the US service to watch the Australian library. I live in a coffee shop in Delaware. Just remember, if you're doing this, pick a US state that doesn't have sales tax. This is the genius.
Yeah,
you
just
used to
don't
say,
go with 90210.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
I thought I was really clever, and I used to say that I lived at 1060 West Addison, which is Wrigley Fields out of the Blues Brothers. And then after a couple of years of thinking I was so smart, I realised I've been paying Illinois sales tax. So stop and think about these things before you sign up. But
and just
HBO's
had looked
the
up
big
my
one.
notes that those grandfather plans expire
Yeah.
in May, so you've got a little bit of time
May, all right.
to
'Cause the
to
dollar's so
jump US
bad.
postcodes.
Yeah.
But do so relatively quickly.
The dollar is so bad at the moment that it's probably more economical now that those prices are going up to pay for the Australian service rather than the US service. But it would mean that I would need to create a new account. And so I would lost all of that accrued over the last couple of years of you've watched this and that kind of stuff. So I'd have to discuss that with the members of my household who also, we all have fake names on Netflix. It's a little running gag in our family. So we'd have to decide whether we're prepared to give that up and start new Australian accounts.
Okay, I guess the other thing that a lot of people have done when Netflix said they were doing this is they said, oh, I'm just going to drop Netflix US. They're gone. I'm not doing this because they've said they're going to do this, those meanies. Is that a reasonable and rational response? And is this going to lead to a big resurgence in Australian piracy?
Well, I think that Netflix's position is pretty clear. I think people sort of lashing out at anger sort of are misplacing it a bit, but they really should be looking at the media companies that set the regional rules. But in terms of piracy, I feel like that argument comes up from people who just really, really want to pirate and they want an excuse to do it.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all.
Yeah.
Really, there's no parallel between, well, I can't get it exactly as I want it, so I should just take it for free. I don't think they really logically follow. But it might follow in the real world.
And that just about wraps it up for this episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Tim for joining us on the show.
Anytime, guys. Thanks.
And remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button.